Jeff Ed Ross, show number 198, recorded on August 1st, first day of August, here in 2007 and 17. And tonight we have a new guest talking about a new subject, 198 shows, Tim, and we've never covered this one. I think we've danced around it a couple of times. We haven't intentionally avoided it, but we just haven't found the right guest until now to come on and talk about it. And that is birth photography. And tonight we have Ashley Siegert coming on to talk about birth photography and what it can mean for your business and things you need to think about and all the things to talk about birth photography. Tim, you have two kids?
15 and 5.
I have 2 kids. The youngest moves out next week to go to college.
Oh, man.
So as we talk about birth photography, the start of life, I'm in a different stage of my life where I got my kids all moving out next week. So that's why I have this big smile on my face. No more kids at home until, winter break, I guess. But tonight we're going to be talking about a different stage of life. We're going to be talking about birth photography. And I was there for my 2 kids. I know, Tim, you were there for yours. But back in the day when my kids were born, maybe this was happening. I don't know. I wasn't aware of it. And so we have nothing other than the horrible video that I took during that time frame. So we're going to show some photos tonight too as we go through this, but we want to talk to Ashley about birth photography and what she's doing with it. But before we do that, Ashley, I always like to start off with something where maybe people who are watching this now or later on aren't familiar with you, and if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into photography, and that. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited. I had told Mike before, I actually have been a longtime listener, and one of your past guests, Scott Green, was actually the second shooter at my wedding.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, because I'm originally from Atlanta, and I know at least Mike is stationed in the Atlanta area. So, I grew up in Atlanta, went to Clemson, hence the Clemson Cup, and met my husband at a wedding after I graduated college, and he was living in Texas. And so we moved to Texas, got married, and my background's in television and education kind of. And when I got out here, most of the crewers for my television work did not really know to find me here and to put me on gigs out here. So I started looking for some extra work, went on Craigslist, found a magazine nearby that hired me as an ad rep. And pretty soon after that, they asked me to start taking pictures of my clients for their blog. And I decided if I was going to be published, I should probably know what I was doing. So I took a course in shooting in RAW at the local community center, caught the bug, and just kind of never looked back. I started shooting anybody that would, let me, and get any resources I could get my hands on, including this podcast. And then I started volunteering for a nonprofit that originally started here in College Station, but is now a national organization called Preemie Prints that does free shoots for families that go through the NICU process. And so that got me doing a lot more volume of baby work. And then I was second shooting for some other photographers here in town and doing weddings, and launched my business officially, and eventually got asked to shoot my first birth. And 4 years later, I've done dozens. And so here we are.
Well, okay. So you how long ago did you say you started in photography?
So I started my business officially 6 years ago, and I've been shooting births for 4 of those.
Okay, 4 years. And that first birth, was it terrifying?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I told my husband, I said, I'm either going to walk out of this completely flying and can't wait to do a zillion more, or I'm going to walk out completely traumatized and we're just going to have to adopt because I'm not even going to want to have our own kids. And
That's true.
It was going to go one way or the other. And luckily it went favorably. It was a pretty easy delivery, that first one. And so I just flew home. Said I didn't even remember the drive home. I was just on cloud nine, and it's such a rush. It's such a very cool thing where, 1 minute there is no person and the next minute there's a new person, and I get to be there for that. That's so cool.
Well, and I should add a disclaimer that everything I'm going to say tonight comes from a male perspective, never having given birth and know what that experience is truly like. So you're going to have to give me a discount on all of that. But I know when I watched the first one born, I thought, if this was guys doing this, there would be no more humans, because we would hear about a friend of ours who knew somebody who had a kid. And they would say, well, that's never happened to us. We're never going to do that. And I remember watching my wife, because neither one of ours were easy, and watching our wife, and it wasn't easy on her. And I thought, well, that's it. We're having one kid, and I don't know why she wanted to do this one.
Yeah.
But then the moment afterwards, it's like everything that just happened didn't happen. And it was a different experience. And I think that would have been awesome to have somebody to have captured that emotion and that feeling, especially after the fact. I don't know if she would have wanted it during the fact, but those times are powerful times.
Well, and that's the other side of it, is it's not just about the baby and the baby entering, but it's also about this, a woman being able to give life and have this like super powerful moment, and have that first moment with her child documented, that first snuggle, that first like laying eyes on your kid for the first time. And even for dad as well, like having that look on dad's face when he first sees the baby come out is crazy. It's just like, those are some of my favorite images. Mm-hmm. And usually there are tears, and, tears are great. I make a living with tears.
Yeah. There's a lot of emotion, both, especially from the mom, but also from the dad too. And maybe other family members who are there. Mm-hmm. All right. So, a few questions, as we lead into more about this is this, I don't know how long this has been around, birth photography, as far as maybe it's been around for a while, but it's getting more widespread. How do you see this in the industry? Is it fairly new? Has it been around for a while? Is it growing? Are more photographers doing it? What's the state of the industry?
I do feel like it's been here. Really, if nothing else, just from the perspective of having family members in there taking pictures and taking video. I know my dad had a video camera in there as well. So from that perspective, it's been happening, but from an industry perspective, it's definitely in this major upswing, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years, and really is about to really explode. And I think part of that is the social media culture, that we want to share everything, and we really have less and less barriers of what it is that we're sharing with social media. And part of that is just, the more emotion and the more joy that we have access to get across, the more we love having those images. And also I think we're getting more and more fear of missing things and forgetting things. And, we have this tangible social media where we're able to go back and remember things that happened years ago that we may have forgotten about. And the more access we have to that, I think it's just feeding the growth of the industry. And I think as we move forward and people are understanding that there's, that this is not there to be medical photography. We're not there. I'm not there as a hospital employee. I'm there for the client. And so I'm there to tell a story, and I'm there to make beautiful emotion images. And yes, while I'm there, I may get some more graphic medical type images, but that's not what my purpose is while I'm there. That's not what I'm looking for. They're just kind of happenstance. So I think, when you're able to look back, half the time you're not going to remember anything, because you're in such a state of adrenaline. Mm-hmm. And to be able to look back at the first moment that you held your baby is just priceless.
I know I took pictures of both my kids, but definitely my daughter. I took more pictures and even have some video from that time frame. And just this past week, my daughter was looking at them. She's 5 years old, and she's watching it. She sees herself crying in the pictures, and she loves it. The one question I have is, and I know I was told by the doctor that I could not take pictures during certain times.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime during the actual birth, they wouldn't let it be taken. And I have to imagine that was in the event something went wrong. They didn't want photographic evidence against them, is my guess.
I think that's probably the case too.
There is some of that. It depends on the hospital that you're working in. In birth centers and home births, you're not going to have nearly as much of that. But the hospitals, they're actually really in competition now for the more affluent clients, and the clients that are hiring somebody like me to come in and photograph their birth are going to be the more affluent clients. It's just it's a disposable income luxury type of item. It's a boutique type of item. And those are the same clients that these hospitals are fighting for, because they're kind of more likely to actually pay their hospital bills, and, they're not having to supplement as much. So birth photography is a luxury item that these clients are looking for a delivery space where they're going to be allowed to have it. And that makes it something that the hospitals can compete for those clients if they allow birth photography. And so depends on the hospital what their policy is on that. I have 3 hospitals here in town. One of them is very relaxed about it. They're totally fine. The only thing that I'm not allowed to shoot is the anesthesiologist's machines in the OR if I'm in there for a C-section. But for any kind of vaginal delivery, they're generally totally relaxed about it. The other hospital does have more of a waist up policy during the actual birth. So you just kind of have to get a feel for what that hospital allows. And a lot of that is about pre-planning. It's about, getting permission from the doctor, sitting down with the head of the department at the hospital and, laying out what it is that you do and making sure they're aware of it and getting clearance. And then, the more you do that ahead of time, the more comfortable they're going to be with how you operate and how you work.
Because you got to work that out with both the doctor and the hospital, right?
It depends. So we have 2 different types of hospitals here in this town. One of them has a model where all of the doctors are staff. There's 13 staff doctors, and whoever is on call when you go into labor is the doctor you're going to get. So there's very little chance you're actually going to get your doctor unless you deliver during business hours. And so with that one, the hospital staff doctors, basically the head of the department, mandated that they're going to be fine with having birth photographers. They had to decide that was the policy. The other hospital, however, has a private practice model where the private practices have privileges at that hospital. So then I'm getting clearance from those doctors, and generally they know whether or not the hospital that they operate in is going to allow it. And so I really only at that point just clear it with the doctor. And the hospital, honestly, as long as the doctor says it's okay, generally they're going to be okay with it. Some of them may have other policies, but it's about knowing, what the rules are in your market.
Do you feel as you do more and more of these, you're building a relationship with the doctors in the hospital so that becomes easier with each one you do, where that might give you an advantage over some of your competitors in the area who haven't built those relationships?
Yes, very much so. And I actually ended up hiring the doctor that delivered cared for me and delivered the 2 different doctors through being the birth photographer. And I chose my doctor by watching them deliver other people's babies. And then the one that actually was on call when I delivered those were the 2 that I would have chosen, was the one that I ended up going with, and then the one who ended up being on call when I delivered. So, and now actually I've interviewed them for my courses, and they are happy to go on camera and talk to me about all of it. And they actually refer me when clients ask if they allow birth photography. They'll hand them my name every time. Yeah.
That is a huge advantage. Yeah, that's really good. So let's talk about, what is someone who's thinking about adding this to their services? a photographer who's thinking about adding this to services, who should add it? What type of photographer, if there is a type, fitting it into, if you're a landscape photographer, this may not be the first thing you do to add to your services. So, maybe you do, I'm just saying in general. But
well, they may actually have an easier schedule because
they
the
may,
landscape
yes.
photographers are not having to schedule with clients as hardcore as
Yeah,
the rest
that's
of
true. But in general, what photographers should be starting to think about this, and if once they do starting to think about it, hey, I'm interested in doing birth photography. What are some of the things they should think about before they take on that first client or really go into it? And before you answer that, do you feel this is more of it would be easier for a female photographer to do this than a male photographer to do it?
Well, I'm going to start with that because I actually, in my beta group for my course, I have 15 students and 2 of them are men.
Okay.
And one of them is actually a doctor in Ghana, and he's super excited about this. And it's so funny, and because when they both entered into the course, I was a little bit taken aback because I wasn't expecting the first people to take my course to be men. And I actually went into a mom's group that is here in town. And I asked them specifically, I was like, how comfortable would you be having a man come photograph your birth? And I was blown away that almost every single one of them said they would be completely fine with it, that as long as they were professional and they weren't giving off the creeper vibe and their images were good, that they would be totally fine with it. Because, we've gotten to a point where, male nurses are becoming a normal everyday part of life. And really a lot of the type of client who's going to hire a birth photographer a lot of times has some more gender equality views anyway. And so that doesn't just go in the feminist direction. Okay. And so a lot of times they're totally comfortable with it. So, it depends on the client, and every client's comfortable with different levels of things. But going back to what type of photographers should add this to their business, I think the most seamless, the way that I have built my business and the way that I teach putting this into my business is somebody who is already shooting newborns. And then if they have comfort level shooting throughout those stages throughout the first year. So my business, the backbone of my business is my birth and first year package, which is birth, newborn, 4, 8, and 12 month. And so if somebody is already shooting newborns, or if they already have kind of a 1 year package, this is how I have differentiated myself in my market from other people who are shooting things like that. I call it my banana in an apples to apples scenario, because it makes what I offer completely different. So they're not able to compare me to anybody else. They're choosing what I do as an artist instead of deciding I want to hire that person based on price compared to what this other person is priced at. There was a 3-part to that question. There was guys who should add it. And
then what should they think about as they're starting to, as they decide they want to add it? What do they need to consider? Because this isn't like a lot of your other photographies. I mean, you're on call. You never know when the woman's going to go into labor. You never know how long delivery is going to be. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns.
Yes.
And you can't just say, yeah, that's not going to work for me. How about next week?
Right. Well, first of all, you can't be squeamish in a medical setting. You can't hate hospitals. You can't hate blood. And there are words that get thrown around in the birthing space that you can't be uncomfortable with terminology. I've had that conversation with my studio partner a few times. The word placenta just freaks her out to no end. So
I don't know why.
And things like that you just have to kind of, be like, okay, that's fine. It is what it is. That's part of the business. And then the other thing is you have to be comfortable in different types of lighting scenarios, because you do not have control over the lighting scenarios that you're working with. So you need to have confidence in your skills to walk into just about any lighting scenario and be able to nail it every time. And then when it comes to timing, the best thing that I can say is the more you can streamline your business and have systems in place, the easier it's going to be for you to situate an on-call into your day-to-day life, if that makes sense. So the more automation you can put into your business. So, if you're tied to your computer hours and hours a day after every session, then, before you ever enter into birth photography, you need to get that system nailed down. You need to figure out either, batch editing, or you need to figure out outsourcing, or you need to have, get your systems down where you are not spending more than like 2 minutes per image, unless it's like a real art piece. And then you need to have a good community of other photographers. One thing I teach is how to get a backup photographer trained up to work with you. And I see Kathy in the chat. She's my backup photographer here. And so she and I work out an on-call schedule of when we're each able to be a hard on-call for each client. And so we are constantly in communication about when one of us needs to be out of town, or when one of us is shooting a wedding that we wouldn't be able to get away from, or any things that would keep us in a situation where we can't get there, we can't break away. And I have an almost 2-year-old, and so I have to figure out being available in the middle of the night and childcare. And actually, sometimes my second photographer ends up being my childcare while I go shoot the birth. And so it's really important that you have a community and a network of photographers in your area that you have built quality relationships with, and then set up a system where, if you can't be there for some reason, that your client's going to be covered.
So as part of that, a woman who's given birth may have built a relationship with you. You've gone through everything with you, and they're super excited to have Ashley there with them, part of the team. And at the time when they go into labor, you, whatever reason, can't make it, and Kathy has to go, and maybe they don't have that relationship with Kathy. Are you doing something beforehand to say, I'm your prime, but hey, here's a great other person that if I can't make it, she's here for you, and she'll do it.
Yes. So that's 2-part. First of all, in the consultation, I tell them that I do have a backup, and should something happen that would make me unavailable, I do have a backup, and you're going to be covered. And if for some crazy reason neither of us is available, then I give them a full refund, if for some reason that happened. But, once we commit and put somebody on the schedule that we've taken them as a client, we try to really make sure that the area around their due date, that one or both of us is available around that time. And then the other side of it, if I think for some reason, sometime around their due date, that I'm going to be out of town, or I'm going to be unavailable, or I'm going to have like some big commercial job or a wedding that I have to shoot, then I make sure that they meet Kathy and they sit down and they have a conversation and they get to know her as a person as well. And, Kathy brings other strengths that I may not bring. She's a grandmother, so she kind of gives off this, like, I'm going to be there and take care of you vibe that I, as an almost 31-year-old, can't really give as much. And so, yes, they're really excited to have me there as part of their team. But a lot of times she'll actually bring other strengths to the table that end up being just as valuable, if not more. But I still handle all of the client consultations and sales and editing. So she'll just go and shoot and then come bring me the card, so that they still get that standardized process of my company's experience, and they still get images that are going to look like what they expect when they hire me from my portfolio, because I'm still editing them and I'm still creating the storyline and the Animoto video and all of that kind of thing. So
Gary in chat asked, well, first Jordan says, Ashley has no competition for me. Great images. And Jordan's a great photographer himself, so that's saying a lot. Gary asked, I see a lot of black and white in the birth photography. Is that because of the lighting?
It's not necessarily because of the lighting. Sometimes it's because of the graphic nature of what it is. And a lot of times I will take out
this image.
Yes. So for that one in particular, some of the more glistening areas on the hand would have been red. And when they're red, you're looking more at, the fact that it's bloody, as opposed to the fact that it's this like hand reaching up into the world. And so that kind of thing.
I got to tell you, of all the ones you sent me, this one is incredible. I like all of them, but this one is incredible. This one is very powerful and emotion packed when I see it. I get goosebumps when I look at it. Just talking about it now, I'm getting goosebumps.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. And I was actually I was going through my Instagram and I realized I hadn't shared it, and I shared it a couple of weeks ago, and it like went to the top of every hashtag and all that kind of stuff. That's one of my, and you can't plan those. You go into competition and you're planning all these things in competition for images. I know everybody's been wrapped up in IPC judging this week. And this is not something you can stage. It happens or it doesn't. And when it does, you just got to be ready. So it's very much a photojournalism mindset as opposed to a portrait studio kind of mindset. And
I take it that's an anesthesiologist in the back, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So our second was a C-section, and this reminds me, this is what must have been a C-section.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So my wife, and they'll wrap this into why I'm saying this. It was several hours. I think it was 10 hours of labor, whatever. And then 2:00 at night, they decided, all right, we give up C-section. Went back there, and they were doing this. And it's even though they are giving you all the medicines and everything, it still makes you nauseous, and there's still a lot going on. And she asked me, are they almost done? And I said, there is no way I am looking. So the anesthesiologist looked over and says, no, they got a little ways to go. So during something like this, and you did a great job of not catching, I don't know how well you could have seen it, but you didn't catch a lot of the gore, but you got the power of the situation of the scene.
That's also a really good cropping.
That's true.
Job,
that's true. That's true. Are there limits to, what the mother may want you to photograph? Are you talking about that beforehand? Hey, I don't want you to get the actual birth, or I do want you to get the actual birth. How much of that talking goes on beforehand?
A lot. My consultations are pretty in depth, and I really kind of get to the core of why they've hired me and what it is that they're looking for. And I have the spectrum of clients. I had one couple that both of them were actually family medicine doctors, and the dad was delivering the baby. And so mom actually wanted everything. She wanted to go back and critique his performance delivering that baby. So she wanted it full on. Wow. She was like, I want to get him catching the baby. I want to see everything. So she wanted it a little more in detail. And then I have some where they're like, I'm not interested in seeing any of that. Don't even plan to show it to me. I don't ever want to see it. And that's fine too. Generally, I'm going to end up getting the more graphic images just from being prepared to get the first breath. It's kind of like you just start, there's such a stigma against spray and pray. Mm-hmm. But in this case, you just you got to spray, you got to see what you get when everything's happening. And so that you're able to get that first breath and get what I call the Simba shot when I have the doctor hold the baby up. And so while you're preparing for that and while you're making sure you're getting all those shots, you're getting all the rest of the more graphic images too. And so if the client has told me that they're not interested, then I make sure not to deliver them. And they're definitely not going to go in their slideshow. I make the slideshow super shareable on if mom's grandpa wanted to watch the slideshow, he's not going to be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And if I have any question, I pull it. But the actual collection that I deliver may have them if they've requested them. And sometimes, especially if it's a mom that I've worked with twice and they didn't want them the first time, I'll ask the second time. I'm like, do you want them this time? And I've actually had some on the second time and be like, yeah, okay. I'm curious now that I've lived through it, now that I've survived it, mm-hmm. I'm kind of, I do want to see the more powerful crowning shots and all that kind of stuff. So I have them and I can always give them to the client, but I generally default to the more conservative side of things. And especially on social media, I mean, if you get going on birth photography on Instagram, you're going to see some graphic stuff. Some of these people, I don't know how they get the model releases on some of this stuff. But those are not the kind of images you'll see on my feed. You'll see the super sweet.
And we're definitely keeping it PG here tonight too. Gary asked, I guess mirrorless cameras without the shutter sound must be great for this. What camera are you using, by the way?
So, yes, that is, and I've actually had this brought up to me a couple times recently, that yes, mirrorless cameras, if you don't have the shutter sound, that's definitely actually even a good selling point. It's just something you can bring up. I'm still on a DSLR. I'm on I bring two bodies, and that's what I am hardcore. You always have to have two bodies. Same reason as a wedding. If one goes out on you, you're not going to be able to recreate this. So you better have a backup. And I also keep them on two separate settings because when there's a spotlight on, the birth area that's in a completely different lighting than the rest of the ambient room, I like to keep one body set for the ambient for their faces and then one set for the spotlight so that I have the dynamic range available to me on two separate bodies. So my two bodies right now are a D800 and a D610, just two full frame DSLRs. And honestly, like they get so wrapped up in what's going on that they don't hear it. Yeah. You know, there's so many other things going on. They're not going to hear the shutter noise. But if you do have a mirrorless camera and in your consultations, you can be like, and my camera doesn't even make a shutter noise. Like that's a great selling point. So live it up.
Since you can't control the lighting, you can't bring in your own lighting, and I imagine you also don't want to do flash, right? Or do you?
It's a gray area. I personally avoid it at all possible costs because as much as shutter noise is not an issue, flashing in their face will be much more intrusive. And so I really do try to avoid it at all costs. But sometimes you just have to find some way to get some more light in there, especially in a home birth situation or a birthing center where they don't have all these big overhead lights that the doctors require to put on so they can work. The midwives don't usually have those kind of rules. And so occasionally you will have to bring in some outside light. But the thing is, like, if they're spending money on a birth photographer, they want good pictures. So I won't hesitate to say, do you mind if I flip on like one light just so I can make sure and nail these shots? Like usually they're like, absolutely, do what you got to do. And, they're kind of in a space where the doctors and nurses are coming in and saying, do you mind if I XYZ? And they're kind of at the point where they're like, yeah, like, you know what you're doing more than I do. Like they're kind of giving their trust over to the professionals, and you kind of ride that wave of be like, trust me, we need a little bit more light. And they're usually okay with it.
I should have asked all these questions at the beginning because I usually get the gear stuff out of the way. But let me go ahead and, since we're headed down that road, the 810, the 800 and the 610. And then what lenses do you normally bring with you?
So my number one workhorse in a birth is a 35 Sigma Art Series Prime. I'm obsessed with that lens. It's on my camera 80% of the time. It's on my camera the whole time, but my second body, I'll switch between like a 70 to 200 if I need to get back to the corner, if there's just too much going on, but I want to be able to like pinpoint dad's face through the crowd or whatnot. Or a 105 macro so that after the baby's born, I get all those, bits, all the eyelashes and fingers and toes and nose and all that kind of stuff. So those are the three main lenses that I'm using at a birth: that 35, the 70 to 200, and the 105 macro. Okay.
I lost my train of thought. Hold on. I wanted to show this photo. So let me bring this one up. All these are ones we've streamed through earlier, but this one and then another one afterward. She gave birth to twins.
Yes.
And that is a super awesome moment where you can just see, whatever she's gone through, what is in her mind is her absolute love for these two babies and just loving the moment. And then I imagine these are those same babies with sister.
Yep.
Who you caught her at the right time. That's one of my
all-time favorite shots.
You caught her at the right time. She probably loves the babies too. Let's say that. But at this moment, she doesn't have that look of love.
Her expressions through that entire hour were gold. But this is my favorite shot I got there. And this family, and actually you can see right over her shoulder, her brother is right behind her. And so their kids were like 7 and 10. And then they got pregnant with these twins. And so there's a large gap between their first two and now their second two. And so, she walked in and she was like, what have we done here? That one is not lacking for personality, I'll tell you right now. And she now, of course, like those girls I think they'll be 3 at Christmas. And the 3 of them are just like a team. They're just best friends. It's so cute to watch. It's been that's the other thing. Like, you become so close to these clients and you watch them grow up and you just become so attached. And so, yeah, this is one of my favorite families.
Well, you know, like you were saying earlier, you're doing it at birth, then you have them for the infant photos, then you have them for the other months. I forgot what you said, but other family shoots. And if you stick with the family long enough, or they have older siblings, you can do seniors and all the way up to weddings. And if you're a photographer thinking about adding this, maybe all those spectrums are not your strong suit, but you could team up with somebody else that, hey, I don't know if, going back to Scott Green, I don't know if he wants to do this kind of thing, but he's a great wedding photographer. So if somebody in his area doesn't want to do weddings, but they want to do this, now you've offered, the whole life series to that family.
Well, and my former studio partner is watching out there, and she is a world-class boudoir photographer. And so we actually used to teach this. We used to teach a course on Studio Share and sharing the life cycle of a client, and how, team up with somebody who shoots what you don't shoot, so you can make sure to keep it in the family, so that they're never going to stray from you to go find some other photographer that shoots something that you don't shoot. So we used to laugh, like, she used to get him pregnant, and then
well, I mean, that's a real thing, is that if you can keep them in that relationship with you, they're not even thinking about where else to go. I know, like, my son had a great time shooting with Scott, and someday hopefully he gets married after college. He will consider Scott for, that'd be the first thing on his mind. Now, his fiance may have something else to say, although he doesn't have a girlfriend. I'm just saying it someday.
Well, he was my second shooter, and I can highly recommend it, because he's amazing.
Yeah. Well, now going back to a photographer who wants to add this to their shooting services, you mentioned all the things they need to consider. And if you're just a weekend shooter and have a full-time job, if you have multiple, our co-host from years ago, remember Kathleen, who I think is pregnant again. This will be number 4, or maybe she's already had it. Number 4, and she's a great infant photographer. Yeah, she's a great photographer. That's how I met her, is through that. But she has 3 or 4 kids now, and this may not. I don't know if this suits everybody. If you don't have the support at home from your spouse or from others, that this may not be something you can do, because you got to be there when this thing happens. And it could, I don't know, what's your longest birth that you've had to be there? Because unlike other shoots where you say, I'll do 2 clothing changes for an hour or half hour, whatever, you got timelines on these things that you're doing. With a birth, there's no end, right?
Right.
I mean, there's an end, but you don't know how long
that also plays into the pricing. Like, you got to make sure you're pricing it to be worth your time. And I'm very lucky. I have a very deep bench. And I have this business model has allowed my husband to quit his job. And so he's home now a lot more, which makes it a lot easier for me to be on call. And then my second photographer, is an empty nester now. And so she has more flexibility if, for some reason I can't pull away, or sometimes she'll come and be my childcare, or I have 5 or 6, we live in a college town, so I have 5 or 6 girls that nanny for us at different times. And so usually I can call, at least one of them will be available if I need to switch out at some point. So one of the longest ones, I think recently, I've done like a 20-hour, but I've been really lucky. I haven't had like the 2-day in the hospital ones, and I don't go until they're 5 or 6 centimeters. I wait and get updates. And so I'm not just like, oh, I'm in labor, everybody rushed there. I wait until they're progressing. So that helps, but I am, aware when they go into labor, and then I have that time to kind of get all my ducks in a row before I leave. And then if it goes long and I have to switch out, I'll start making phone calls, and, takes a village. So it's all about keeping your community tight and loving on them. And, I will send over a ton of gift cards, and like, don't hate me, just keep loving me.
Jan has a good question. I want to come back to something you mentioned. Have you ever had a mother change her mind at the last minute? That maybe she's on edge, and then when it's time, when push comes to shove, she decides, you know what, this isn't for me.
That's that's totally fair. And if they did, I would respect that completely. But I am incredibly thorough with my consultations and relationship building. And so I make sure they can ask any question that they have beforehand. If I sense that they have any reservations, then, I can kind of usually talk them through it and kind of figure out what the root of it is beforehand. Like I said, I become part of the team, and part of that is a little bit of psychology and, loving on my clients and becoming part of their support system. And so actually I have more that at the end will say, I was hesitant and my gosh, I'm so glad we did it. Yeah. I had no idea I'd be so appreciative that we did it, but I've never had one back out at the last minute.
So just to update you on chat over on the website, because we have chat in 3 different places, but on the website,
I see my people there.
Yeah. Megan says, if you're going to keep calling me out live, I guess I better log in to chat so I can defend myself. So
that's
welcome, Megan. She said she's been watching, just not logged in.
Yeah.
All right, you mentioned pricing. You mentioned pricing earlier on. Since this is so unique, and not like a wedding where there's a defined timeline and a defined date, and not like a senior shoot where everything I can think of in photography, there's really a really defined date and timeline. It's going to last a certain amount of time. Mm-hmm. This one, you got to be on call. I mean, you must, I don't know how many clients you have live at one time, how many you have going at one time, but if you have a client, just one at a time, every time the phone rings, you must be on edge, and you got to be alert at night. You can't deep sleep. Somebody's got to wake you up.
Right.
So you're really, at some point in the pregnancy, you're on call 24/7. And then you don't know when it's going to be, and you're going to be there a while. How do you price all that? And do you feel after the fact, at least in what you've done so far, that the pricing is worth it? It's still a profitable endeavor.
Right. So this is kind of a twofold answer. If you are shooting births exclusively versus if you're shooting births as part of a lead-in to a year-long package, you can price it a little bit differently. So because it's my lead-in to my year-long package, I generally am able to charge a little bit less because I know I'm going to make it up in the portrait sales on the back end, which makes it a little bit more enticing on the front end. However, if you're shooting births exclusively and therefore your time is accounted for all the time, then I think you have to keep that into consideration. So I was having this conversation with another birth photographer in Dallas, and she called it actually a loss leader, that from an hour to hour standpoint, if you end up in a really long birth, from an hour to hour standpoint, you may not make your minimum hourly sales goal that you would normally have for any other portrait session. But the fact that it gets that client into your cycle of 4 or 5 more sessions and in your door multiple times makes it worth it. But then you're also going to have births that take 3 hours. And over the life cycle of many, many clients, they'll all kind of balance out. And so you kind of keep that in mind as well. So I always say, this is a luxury item. This is something where you're going to have to be on call and put yourself out there for it. So if you're doing it professionally, I tell my students, I don't want you charging under 4 figures. I want at least $1,000 for everything that you're doing. But I mean, it can be up to like $5,000. It can be beyond that. Like any pricing in the photography world, it's about your skill level, your market, what your market can bear, how much competition you have, what your business goals are at the end of the year, working backwards from that. You have all of those variables involved. But for me, I have done it as about somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000, and then they come back in for the 4 sessions, and I know how much I'm going to be making as my minimum sales goal in each of those in-person sales sessions for the rest of the year. So it all kind of comes together to be a large client at the end of the year.
Okay. Speaking of, your profit on this, every professional photographer should have insurance as part of their deal. Does that, your regular insurance, you think good enough if you're going to go into this, or should you consider anything extra?
No, I have discussed this with my insurance carrier when I started, and I even asked again after I knew I was going to be going into a C-section and it was going to be an OR situation. And they have assured me that my basic, my business policy covers all of these situations as well. I can't speak to that from a professional insurance law standpoint because that's not my specialty. So I would tell everybody to check with their own carrier and in their own area. But for me, I've been told that I'm good to go with my regular insurance policy.
Yeah, and neither you or I given legal advice or insurance advice. We're just talking in general.
Speaking of which, the contracts are very important. You ought to make sure you have a good birth contract in place as well.
Yep.
I
agree. Yep. I want to bring up
I know you've had Rachel Brinke on here
Yes.
many times, and I use her birth contract, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, you want to do that to cover you and go over it with your client, not just have them sign it and walk away. Because you know how we all are. If we have something to sign, God knows how much stuff I've signed for my kid to go to college. I didn't read any of that stuff. But that's why you as the photographer want to go over some of that stuff with the client, make sure that everybody's on the same page. I want to show this image, one, because I love this image, but also to ask another question after we look at it. Because I love, this is one with the dad. You can't see his face, but he's got a smile under there by the look at his eyes. And then the mom back there who looks proud of both the dad and the mom in that shot. So another one that I just love that image. But it made me think, and it's going to get maybe a little... I don't know how to describe this. I'm just going to say it. The mom is always the mom. The dad's always the dad. But there could be a situation down the... Well, biologically, whoever gave birth is the mom. Whoever got her in that situation is the dad. But the dad may not... There may be situations down the road where the dad and the mom are no longer together. Do you ever consciously make sure to get photos that don't include the dad?
Yes. I mean, I'm taking so many images throughout the course of a birth that you're going to have plenty from any direction. And the reason that I was making all those faces is because in my course, I recently did an interview with a photographer in Canada who did this incredible surrogate birth where the gestational carrier was giving birth, but the two dads were there. And then recently she just had another client where they did a maternity session with the gestational carrier, the two dads, and the egg donor. So there were like 4 parents. So you can end up with any and all kinds of situations. And I just saw Megan put in the chat asking about adoptions as well. And those situations, it's a totally different mindset because when it comes to adoption, like if you're there for the delivery of an adoption baby, somebody at the end of that day is walking out of there without a baby. Mm-hmm. And so it changes the whole mood of the room, and you become less of a team member in the delivery and more of a fly on the wall, kind of letting it all happen and letting them all have their emotions and their time. And so as much as with most of my traditional families, I become one of their people, and I'm kind of reading the room on how much to talk and how much not to talk based on pain levels and just how long we've been there and how awkward dad seems if he needs somebody to just like distract him and those types of things, and reading the room. When it comes to more of the special cases, and I've got a whole module on special cases, there's a whole lot more like step back, be a fly on the wall, and just take your pictures and let it happen. So,
how much are you interacting with in any birth? How much are you interacting with the mother, the other people who may be in the room? How much are you interacting versus just being almost unseen and getting taking a shot?
It really depends on. Honestly, the biggest factor there is an epidural. If they are medicated and they're just like what's up, guys? How's everything going? Then I'm going to be a lot more interactive because they'll be asking me questions. They'll be bringing up conversation. They're really just trying to pass the time at that point. At least that's how I was.
Yeah.
And so they're like, all right, we're just waiting it out at this point. And so they're a lot more conversational. But on the other side, when they are laboring hard, I am going to be a lot less vocal. I'm going to be a lot less interactive because she's got work to do and she doesn't need anybody distracting her. And then with Dad, I am a lot, I do most of my talking with Dad if there's a C-section prior to us being brought in, because usually if there's a C-section, they'll take Mom back, they'll get her like strapped onto the table, they'll get her like spinal block put together and get her dressed for the surgical field. And in that time, they basically like give me and the dad like these paper scrubs and we're like getting dressed and then we wait. And so that I have some images of like dads waiting to be brought back into the OR where you can just see like the anticipation and the anxiety and the fear in their face. And I say dads, partners. I've had this happen across the spectrum of relationships. And so in that moment, like I'll kind of let them have that moment for a little bit, but if they look like they're about to faint and freak out, I'll be like, so tell me how you guys met, tell me about your wedding. Like the same thing as you would, like if you were, at a wedding and the bride looked like she was about to pass out and it was just you two back there, you'd be like, you're good. Like, I got you.
It's an emotional time. For everybody involved. And how do you as a photographer remain professional and not let yourself get wrapped up in the emotion? Imagine the emotion does touch you, but you still got to, remain, you can't just observe the moment. You've got to record the moment.
I mean, sometimes you're going to be shooting through tears. It just is part of it. And I know a lot of wedding photographers that are shooting through tears that like can't hold it together at every wedding, and that's fine. If you're skilled enough to handle your camera, you can handle yourself, but you also don't need to be making a scene. Like you don't need to be the center of attention. This is not about you. So like, if you've got to like wipe it away a little bit and kind of move forward, then, that's fine. But, don't be back there like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. All
right. Another question. If you're working, you're trying to get a client to do this, and the dad says, well, hey, I'm going to be there. I'll just take the shots. Why do I need you? I got, I got this. I got the cell phone thing here.
Yep.
It's got a 16 megapixel camera in this thing. Why does it need you again?
So I get that a lot. And on the back end of that, I have many videos of so many dads going, oh my gosh, if I had been expected to handle a camera while I was like witnessing all of this, I would have been toast and I would have gotten in so much trouble later because I wouldn't have taken any pictures. And secondly, that's not a word, but Next, they're not going to get the images that I'm going to get. They don't have the perspective that I have. They're having this moment between them that they can't, unless they're selfieing while they're trying to like be all supportive and loving, then, even then it's not going to be as genuine. So, and also, a lot of times there's stuff going on outside of the room or outside of their, space that I'm off getting while they're in the room, and they never would have gotten that. So like I'll go out and get the family waiting in the waiting room, or I'll get, the signage and things that they won't think to get because they're wrapped up in the fact that they're about to have a baby. And then, but I've had a few tell me, they're like, if I don't want to have to be fumbling with the camera, I don't want to have to touch my phone because then I'm going to end up texting people. I'm going to end up looking at Facebook. I'm going to get in trouble.
And of course, if they want to, there's nothing stopping them from taking a shot here or there.
No.
But if you plan on getting great coverage of the entire process and also being involved in the process, I don't see how you can do both well.
Right. And I've had two separate situations where the baby was then taken away from the parents. One where it was a NICU admit. Mm-hmm. And so I went with the baby while dad stayed with mom. And like the look of relief on his face when he found out that I was going to be able to get to go with the baby, because like one of his tribe was going to the NICU with the baby while he was there with mom. That was so helpful. And I got images of like the baby being stabilized and like all the doctors and nurses that were there with the baby and like things that that nobody would have seen, because nobody would have taken those pictures. Right. And then another one where it was an emergency C-section and she hadn't had an epidural yet, so they had to put her under. And so that whole first hour after the birth, where they were doing all the measurements and everything, like they missed completely. And so I was in there getting all of that, and they had to live vicariously through those instead of being a part of it live. So there's just situations where I've ended up saving their first hours that they would have missed with their kid.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much going on. You need to pay attention to who you're there to support rather and hire professionals. So let's say I'm a photographer who wants to get into this. Is there any resources out there for me where I can go and learn more about it? And maybe, I don't want to just jump in and do this with no resource. What do I do?
Well, it's funny you ask, Mike. No, I just spent the last 7 months building a full video program for birth photography. So it is everything. It's how I do my client consultations. It's got email templates of how I, hey, look, there's my website, of how I interact with the clients, like from the minute they inquire all the way through delivering their 1-year album at the end. I've got interviews with doctors and nurses and midwives. And I actually got into the local medical school and we did some actual deliveries with the delivery dummies. So they're like mannequins that deliver babies. And so we did whole births, both C-section and regular, with the delivery dummies. And then, or they call them sim mom. So that was really cool. And then it's, I've got, special sections on all of the shoots that I do through the 1-year program. There's like 3 different whole shoots in my studio in there. There's, like I said, the surrogate birth and like special cases and adoptions and how I work with my second photographer and how I edit and how I deliver and make my slideshows, like everything. I've just jam-packed it all in there. So those links I've sent over. And
do I have the right website pulled up?
Yeah.
Okay,
that's
good.
it.
Because this wouldn't have worked. This wouldn't have been as impressive if I had the wrong website pulled up. So I'll have the link here in the show notes, but it is the Ultimate Birth Photography Resources. And then, resource. Yeah. So,
the platform that I built it on makes a really, really long link, but in the show notes, I made a bit link for it. So it's super short and it's just a bit.ly link, but birth resource. So bit.ly/birth resource.
Yep. We'll have the link in the show notes too. And there she is. There's Ashley.
It's me.
Awesome. I gotta imagine it's so scary the first time you go to do this. And having a resource like this that you can go to and then somebody they can chat with. I imagine they get in touch with you and ask questions.
There's a Facebook group. They can ask me and all the other birth photographers in there. And, and that's really where I was really struggling because there are so many courses on every other kind of photography out there. You can learn whatever you want to learn online. And in 4 years, I hadn't found one for births. And I just felt like it was a really big hole in the market. And, with it being a rising, growing trend, I saw the need and jumped on it. So it's completely consumed me for the last 7 months, but it's been a ride. It's been a lot of fun.
So if when someone joins or signs up for this, then they can be added to the Facebook group. Is that how that works? Yeah. And to build a community around it is an awesome idea.
Yeah. And I mean, I've had photographers that are like, they write in from the hospital room. They're like, I'm at a birth right now and this is happening. What do I do? And, there's a whole group of people that are like, oh, try this, or, oh, last time that happened to me, this is what I did and it totally worked. Or, any of those things or even, if there's a lighting complication, I've had to coach some people through like, ask if you can turn on a light. You can do this. I believe in you. Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Oh, I like that shirt. Be flexible and work with your situation. I know everything I learned in whatever that class is called. It wasn't Lamaze, it was something else. Nothing I learned in there helped me one bit except for be flexible.
Yeah.
And 2 was, I think that was it. So whatever I was doing
was married to a plan.
Whatever I was doing wasn't working, and my wife let me know, so I just did something different.
Yep. That's pretty much the best advice you can give to anybody in a birthing situation. Just be completely flexible because it's not going to go how you planned.
Yeah.
Like there's this huge push for the birth plan and how you want your birth experience to be and XYZ. And at the end of the day, the goal is to have healthy baby, healthy mom. And however that needs to happen, you got to make the best choices for you and you have to advocate for yourself. And I respect everybody's birth choices.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the goal is healthy baby, healthy mom. And it is not my job to have an opinion on the rest of it. So I try to stay in the back and keep my mouth shut and take my pictures.
Very good. All right. Well, actually, we're now at the end of the hour. I don't know if I've covered anything that I forgot.
It went so fast.
It did go so fast. And I'm looking through. What is going on here? Okay. I don't know if I think the video is still going. Yeah.
Oh,
okay. They're saying it's still going.
That would not be good.
They're saying it's still going. Sometimes that computer messes up over there, but I got 4 computers going in this. All right. So I think I covered everything. If not, we'd love to have you back on some other time. This is a great topic.
Sure.
It's a long time since I've had kids, but it still is, that emotion still is in me. I remember that like it wasn't, that long ago. I do remember that when the doctor came in,
rush.
they turned off Spaceballs, the movie, which was playing up there. Me and the anesthesiologist was watching it, but apparently the doctor didn't want it on. Whatever. So we'd love to have you back sometime later on and talk more about how your course is going, how the photography's going, anything new in birth photography. It's a great addition if you can swing it. If it works out for you as a photographer, it's a great addition to start building that relationship with your clients. Just make sure you can deliver.
Yeah.
Yep.
No pun intended.
You caught that. All right. Well, if you came in late, like Megan did, we're going to say she was late. If you came in late and you want to catch this later, we do record it. I recorded just for Megan. We recorded it. It will be out. The raw version here is on YouTube right away as soon as we finish. But the edited version, which I just clipped the beginning and ending, that's not a heavy edit. It's not an ESPN edit. That will be out on YouTube later, probably this weekend, and then on Vimeo and on iTunes, video large, video small, and also in audio format. It'll be out on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, Podbean. Where's my list? Podomatic. And Google Play Music and Spreaker, all those places. So the best way to get this is to subscribe to the show, and then you'll get it. Either you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and get it that way, or you can subscribe to iTunes or any of those other places. There's lots of places to subscribe. And Tim, I made something we go to our website. Let me pull that up here. You go to the website and then you go over to subscribe. I made this new. As I give up on the forums, I've started to do a few other things. Not that they're linked, but if you want to subscribe, you come over to subscribe. And then you got the main show. You got all the different audio formats that iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn. I didn't mention that one earlier, and then RSS that can go to anything. And then videos on iTunes, YouTube, Vimeo, and then RSS for that. So you can get it any of those ways. If you want to join us on social, we have a number of Facebook groups. Our page, the main group, our beginners group, a sports group, and a boudoir group. I would say that the sports and the boudoir are not that active, so we'd love to have you come in and help move that along. The beginner and main group are pretty active. And then, of course, we're on Twitter and YouTube and all those other places. So we'd love to have you come and join out there. I didn't mention, don't remember, but we just ended the July photo contest. We have a photo contest in our beginners group and our main group. We just ended that yesterday. So the voting for that will happen here in the next couple of days. And we need to pick topics for next month. If you're wanting for August, if you're wanting to enter the August contest, 2 ways to do it. You can come over here to our group page, jpegtheraw.com, go up to contest entry, photo contest entry. It still says July. That'll change in a couple of days. And enter through the website here, or just go to our Facebook group, the beginners group, or the regular group, And the album for the month is always pinned to the top. We'd love to have you join. We do a review. A.D. Wheeler and I do a review of 10 or so of the images, not always all of them, but 10 or so of the images that were entered each month to help give feedback and help us all improve as photographers. AD does a great job of doing that. It's mainly him. So you can come out there and enter one of those contests, get your photos reviewed by AD and get some great feedback on how you can improve. Or sometimes, hey, he thinks it's a great image with you're there. You don't need to improve that image, but we're always learning, always learning. So let's have you join one of those areas and come out there and participate. I think that's all I have. Tim, anything I'm forgetting as we close out?
No, I think you got everything.
I know. I need to have a better...
Amazon. You didn't mention Amazon.
Yeah, so at the top, I'll go back to this. I do have the Amazon link again. I'm not going to oversell it, but it's right up there at the top. I don't know if y'all can even see my mouse, but the top of the page, there's an Amazon link, and over here on the home page, there's a little Amazon button. I'm not really pushing that anymore because, Amazon keeps wanting to kill all its affiliates, and I'm not going to fight that battle for too long. We're not a profit thing anyway, but we do use whatever we get as far as money to do giveaways and the different contests. So if you are going to buy from Amazon, you want to use that link, that's fine until they kill us again. We would like you to sign up for our newsletter, which is on most pages over here on the right-hand side. And one more thing I thought about this, Tim. I have a new thing here called podcast events. I don't know if you can even see that, but as we had tried to do forums, Ashley. And I couldn't get, we probably had,
couldn't get me to go there.
Probably had a couple hundred members, but no one posts but me. So I just gave up on that. That's just not going to happen. But one of the things I loved about it is that's where I'd put, when I booked somebody for the show, I'd put their information out there and you can see going forward. So it's not ready yet. So when you look at it, don't say, Mike, that there's nothing there. But when you go to podcast events, and then we'll go to previous events, so there's nothing there. But when I go to previous events, you can see I'm going to start adding I think I'm not going to add the start of the contest. I'm just going to add the end of the contest because who cares about the start? But it'll have whatever's coming up, whatever's on the calendar. Ashley's coming up August 1st. I'll have that in there. And what you can do, this is the trick, Tim. This is where it really pays off.
It's actually in the bottom.
Huh? Yeah,
Ashley's
I know.
in there at the bottom.
But when you click on it and you come down here, you got all this cool little information, and you come down here, there's a link at the bottom to add it to your Google Calendar or
look at that.
your iCal, which I think is Apple.
Yes.
So you can add it to your calendar if you want, if you use one of those two calendars. So there you go. You can add it.
Fancy.
Add to that and know when that event is going to happen.
I like that.
I do too. It looks cool too. All right. Well, that is all I have. Thanks, guys, for coming out here to the live show. From one of the three places, let's see, over on our website, we had Megan, Nancy, Ashley, and your husband earlier.
Yeah.
He may still be there. I just don't see his name. And on YouTube, Jan, Gary, Daniel. Oh, he moved over there. Daniel, Jordan, and I know there was somebody I'm missing. If I'm missing you,
Kathy's
Brad,
in there somewhere.
Kathy.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for coming out live and watching. Ashley, it was a great show. Loved having you out here, Ashley. And
Thank you.
Guys out in chat, we'll see you next week. Until then, keep it raw. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.